the Board podcast powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And as we always do before we kick things off, encourage you to go to FanDuel.com/bet-the-board. Take advantage of your $1,000 risk-free bet for new user signups, 30-1 enhanced odds, and a myriad of other ways to put your money to work for you as soon as today. Payne, another week of college football has come and passed. Our listeners who grabbed the best of the number with the Minnesota Golden Gophers were treated to quite the sweat in the final 2 minutes last Saturday at Kinnick Stadium.
It's obviously important to get the best of the number, and that's why I had to beat you to the 6 that was available in your backyard.
Son of a bitch. Now, thankfully, I was able to get some 6 through back channeling, so I was okay there.
Yes, you almost slipped there. Back channeling. That was available all the way until Friday evening. You could have gotten 5.5 a couple places. Obviously, it's always important. We, grade at the line we give it out on Wednesday. It's always a widely available line that we give out on Wednesday. And, I'm sure some people navigated their morning slate and then listened to the podcast and said, hey, I'll take 4. That is unfortunate, right? Minnesota should have won the game outright, had 41 minutes of possession, outgained Iowa by 123 yards, gave up an explosive here or there, but otherwise dominated that game and wasn't fond of PJ Fleck, right? I mean, kicking field goals from the 1-yard line, being able to run right down Iowa's throats and, kicking field goal before the break and slowing it down rather than with 45, 50 seconds left on 3rd and short, pick up the first down, right? The clock stops. Take a shot at the end zone at that point once the clock stopped, right? Or once you pick up the first down, clock it and then take a shot at the end zone. I mean, sitting there watching 3rd and 1 and him just drain the last 40 seconds to call a timeout and kick a field goal. PJ Fleck was terrible, and Minnesota should have won that game. And then you get the unfortunate break at the end where we are all rooting. It's crazy how this changes as sports bettors, right? We're sitting there with 5.5 and 6 in our back pocket, and Minnesota scores a touchdown, down 2. They're going for 2. We all of a sudden change our rooting interest. We don't want them to make the 2-point conversion and go into overtime and somehow get screwed that way. But then, you have the situation where you take a sack and it's 4th and 17 from your own 2-yard line, and you're like, oh, here we go. But Iowa didn't really seem intent on trying to score. It was like this half kneel/QB sneak on first down. You're like, okay, we're going to be pretty good. We're going to hold to a field goal here. And we got out of Dodge, but should have won that game outright if it wasn't for PJ Fleck.
Incredible. I mean, you talk about teams that are aggro-aggressive and wanting to go out there and take chances. We know Minnesota hasn't really had their big win in the Floyd of Rosedale against Iowa. They finally get the lead going into the break. They give up that momentum score right out of the half. And here you are, the Hawkeyes hang on for dear life. I can't imagine, though, Payne, how many boo birds would have been out for Kirk Ferentz if his decision to kick the field goal late in that game to go up 5 ends up coming back to haunt them if Tanner Morgan throws a Hail Mary or something ridiculous happens in the final 35, 40 seconds.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. Unfortunately, we also got a bad performance from Tanner Morgan despite Bell being back. That was one of the things that we loved seeing was, hey, like Ottman Bell's back, the horse, and certainly he was integral in the late touchdown. But you mentioned having a lead at halftime there. So Minnesota goes in to the break, has the lead by 3. They get a stop, I believe. And then you are driving and you have like 3rd and 7 from right outside the green zone, and Tanner Morgan just airmails a wide open receiver. So I mean, those are like the little things sometimes that you'll notice within a game that can just absolutely change the complexion. So instead of, up 3, completing the 3rd and 7 to a wide open receiver and going and getting points and potentially being up 10, you decide to punt after you don't pick up the layup first down, and then one play later you're down 4. After the massive explosive. So there's always some swingy things, especially in college football, and your hope is that like 18, 19, and 20-year-olds can rebound. Sometimes that doesn't always happen.
Nope, it doesn't, but alas, we're able to get the cover there. Like we said, we got our entertainment value. I do appreciate your play-by-play as I was driving to a wedding. So for the first Saturday all season long, I wasn't parked in front of a TV from start to finish. Tried to convince the fiance that, hey, look, we're waiting for an update from Payne. We can't go into the reception yet because I don't want to be that guy busting out his cell phone. You provided me good news and at least set the tone for the evening, to say the least.
I received a text from the fiance.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. You're on a first name basis. The relationship there is great, and I know she has no qualms whatsoever about sending you notes or busting my balls in a very public forum. So glad that relationship.
I heard
is
you
there.
are. She texted me and said that you were Mr. Hollywood at this.
Oh, this was actually a good story. This is a complete tangent. So we're there. And I never know. Sometimes
it's a good thing this podcast is going to be quick. But go ahead.
Well, no, we'll just shorten up the games and we'll go more anecdotal stuff than anything else. It's always interesting because you go into an environment and it's not my friends; it's one of her oldest friends. So I have no idea if people are going to be sports fans or anything else along those lines. And I know you keep a very low profile, and I give you a ton of credit for it when you go out and about in your distinct circles. And so I don't tell people typically what I do by any stretch. So people are talking, and I'm sitting there on my hands as sports discussion starts to come up. They're talking about players. There's a lot of Giants fans there and everything else. And I can see her smirking the entire time, knowing that it's eating away at me, letting these people kind of banter back and forth. And so one of the guys at the table turns. He goes, what do you do for a living? I go, well, I work in the sports industry. And then I see a kid on the other side of the table who's probably had about 37 shots of Patron at that point. His eyes light up and he goes, oh my God, I know who you are. And I'm going, oh, no, I don't want to do this. The kid for the next 2.5 hours, as nice as he was, proceeded to ask me every question about the industry, ask about everybody I've worked with, and follow me around for a puppy, like a puppy dog. So it was a little bit uncomfortable in that context, but it's good to know gambling is taken off. People listen to our podcast and watch a lot of the gambling content we put out there.
So I'm dealing with a guy with a pretty large ego today.
There's no ego, because we know in this business you're only as good as your last bet.
Yes.
And we still have a lot of work to do.
Yes, that's the mindset from the casual guys.
Yes, there is no doubt about it. You flip coins, you go 15-5. That makes you better than someone who goes 12-8 consistently over a significant sample size.
By the way, who has a wedding this time of year? I mean, that is off limits. I don't know if I could still remain friends with someone who decided to have a wedding in November. I mean, that right there is something that you could get deported naked to the Taliban for and castrated.
This is the kind of guy. This is the kind of guy I am. I am a supportive partner in all of this. And since the wedding is in Nevada, it fit in the parameters of our fall wedding rules that I've laid out well ahead of time, that unless you're in the wedding party or a wedding is local, I do not travel for fall weddings, given the responsibilities of our job. So, I mean, you have to,
and she's younger,
a little bit of give and take.
You're going to be doing this a bunch.
Oh, don't remind me. Don't remind me about that. So I'm hoping that everybody decides to get married out of town. She's not in weddings, and they're all in the fall, so I don't have to travel.
There you go.
So
that's the perfect combination. A little weekend home alone.
Exactly. All right. Well, before we get into some of the games, college football playoff, no surprises.
Nothing changed
yesterday.
Let's move on.
All right, there we go. We officially covered the college football playoff. We're in a good spot.
I don't want to have a debate about if Alabama loses close to Georgia if they're still in the top four. Let's save that for the talking heads on television.
All right, we'll start with a team that I think a lot of people are surprised they find themselves 7th behind a team that they beat who sits in the number 6 spot. That, of course, being the Michigan State Spartans. But the reality of it is no one cares what Michigan State has done. If you don't win this weekend, your playoff hopes and dreams are completely dashed. And they have an uphill battle as a 19.5-point underdog going into Columbus to take on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Total in this game, Payne sits at 67.5. When you look at the Buckeyes, they lead the nation in scoring at more than 46 points per game, more than 48 points per game at home, which is 5th in the nation. Ohio State has won 5 straight in this series, with the last 4 all coming by 20-plus points. And I think you and I both identified a very interesting quote from Michigan State's head coach Mel Tucker that probably provides the perfect jumping-off point as we break down the X's and O's.
So he was in his presser yesterday, and obviously the background of Mel Tucker is defense. But he basically said he hates the idea of a shootout, and he's not in the shootout business, and when he hears that word, it makes him want to vomit. So when you hear him say things like that, right off the bat, it tells me if Mel Tucker had his way, he wants to slow this game down, play keep away on offense, feed Kenneth Walker 35 plus times and then rely on Peyton Thorne to make some timely throws. Let's see if that's how it shakes out. We know Ohio State's defense has had some issues. The front seven is obviously really, really talented, but they're not overly experienced. And you're seeing that, right? For the first time in multiple years, you can push the Buckeyes front around a little bit. They're outside the top 40 in line yards. Only stuffed 17% of runs. That's outside the top 75. Over 40% of runs have graded successful against the Buckeyes. That's outside the top 50. So if Michigan State's offensive line shows well here, there's certainly a path for some relative offensive success for Sparty, I would say. And once you get that ground game going, you have to think about the pieces that Ohio State's replacing year over year, right? It's the linebackers. They went from one of the most experienced linebacker groups to one of the most inexperienced. And so Ohio State's really sensitive to play action. And you look at Peyton Thorne's makeup as a passer, 38% play action rate. It's far and away the most comfortable he is when he's throwing. 140 passer rating, 12.2 yards per pass attempt with play action. Any other throw that Thorne has made this season without play action, passer rating dips to 84. Yards per pass attempt decreases by more than 5 yards. We know Ohio State's secondary's really been a question mark for 2 seasons now. They're still vulnerable, 61st in EPA per pass allowed. You can make some plays on them through the air. But to kind of execute this plan where it's, slow with Walker on the ground and then, the critical third down conversion through the air or the explosive over the top off play action, you need the offensive line to show out. And Sparty's offensive line, I would say, is solid, not great. They are down their starting guard, Matt Karsick, out for the year. Left tackle, Jarrett Horst, got injured in the practice leading up to Purdue. Hasn't played the last 2 games, so let's monitor that. But you basically have an above-average O-line potentially playing without 2 starters against the most talent they've seen up front. That might not go as well as we think, right? That game plan of being able to just mull Ohio State might not work if you're down 2 guys. We know Jalen Naylor, Sparty's deep threat, hasn't played since the Michigan game with the hand injury. So can someone else other than Reed step up and be the explosive guy downfield when Thorne inevitably throws with play action if Naylor can't go here? So some of the key parts to executing this plan of attack, Todd, are either not going to be there or not close to 100%.
Yeah, what's the line? Everybody has a game plan until they get hit in the face. I think for Michigan State, as long as they can stay in a neutral state, they're able to keep Kenneth Walker very much in the mix. We know these are going to be 2 of the Heisman frontrunners on full display. Of course, the team that comes out victorious or puts up a better stat line may seize control of that particular race. And the reason is because when you look at Ohio State on the other side of the ball, they're going to have a massive advantage, Payne, and that is in their passing attack against this Michigan State secondary. So when you look at C.J. Stroud, 17 touchdowns to just 2 picks over his last 5 games. He's had 4 300-yard games during that span, 2 400-yard performances. And I think what's crazy about Ohio State when you look at this team, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave grab all the headlines. I mean, this tandem is as good as any in college football. Then you add in Jackson Smith, and I don't even know how to pronounce his last name, so I'm not going to try, who leads the team with 59 catches for over 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns. Welcome in the Michigan State secondary, which just happens to be a worst in the conference and one of the worst in the Power 5. If you're Ryan Day and company, I mean, should this be as simple as take deep shot after deep shot after deep shot and trying to score from no matter where you are in the field every single time you're snapping the ball offensively?
So there were some rumblings that both Penn State and Nebraska's defenses were calling out Ohio State's plays before they were ever ran. Even, it was wild to see, right? Like in my mind, if players and coaches are insinuating that, and if you read some of the clippings and pressers, like that's kind of what's being indicated. And then you can confirm it with data where Ohio State has their worst 2 offensive performances in both success rate and EPA per play on the entire season. It's extremely probable defenses had a good idea of what was coming. Now, last week, against I would say damn good Purdue defense, Ohio State was successful in 59% of their snaps, a positive 0.75 EPA per play, which is just a ridiculous number. Touchdowns on the first 6 drives. Ohio State scored on every first half possession and then added another touchdown on the opening drive of the second half. Ryan Day changed up what they had been doing. And the goal was to get the ball out of C.J. Stroud's hands quicker. Let the most talented receiver group operate with the ball after the catch. So Stroud's release time, on average, 2.1 seconds. Prior to last week, Stroud's average release time was nearly 2.8 seconds. And to put that in perspective, that goes from a below average time to throw the ball to one of the fastest in the country. And so they didn't take those deep shots. They were comfortable kind of picking, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 yards a pop, letting the receivers operate. And so now when Sparty's attempting to kind of game plan for Ohio State's offense, what are they preparing for? Right? Like the deeper passing offense where Stroud holds it and pushes it downfield, or the quick pass attack. Either way, Ohio State's going to have success through the air here. And for me, this is one of the larger mismatches in a big game this week. Michigan State does not do a great job getting pressure up front. So, it can leave Sparty exposed on the outside. Sparty kind of plays off coverage. They're 58th in PFF's coverage grade. They like to play, they don't necessarily have the horses to play man and get in your face. So they are susceptible to the quick pass that we saw Ohio State execute last week against Purdue. I don't see a ton of talent in the back. Now, you get an Ohio State offense, and you're looking at this, even though they had that little 2-game struggle, right? And, it's a freshman quarterback. You're going to go through some lulls in his first season, but they're still number 1 in the country in passing success rate, going up against a defense outside the top 60 in both passing success rate and EPA per pass allowed. And the kicker, Sparty's played a really weak schedule of passing offenses. I mean, you have Indiana on the schedule, Rutgers, Northwestern, all are outside the top 100 in EPA per pass. You faced a less than 100% De'Aaron King, and he went for 388 yards. Purdue, who's a top 30 in EPA per pass, you lost to by double digits. Aiden O'Connell probably had his best game as a college quarterback when you consider the circumstance. He posted a positive 0.72 EPA per pass in that upset. Western Kentucky, the other passing offense with a pulse on the schedule, hung 31 points and a 53% success rate overall in that game. So any of the better passing offenses that Sparty's faced this year has done quite well. You also have to monitor some injuries for Michigan State. Charles Brantley, who moved into the starting corner role, missed the Maryland game. He graded out Sparty's best cover corner. Simeon Barrow, the big fella on the interior line for Sparty, far and away their best interior lineman, did not play at Maryland. All signs here are pointing to Ohio State doing what they want on offense. I look at this number, Todd, and
tells you all you need to know.
It does, and we said that in the Penn State game, and you kept me off Ohio State there because you're like, hey, something Penn State's doing is really giving them success against Ohio State, the last few years, and you were spot on there. But this is a little bit different, right? Not only is the line a touch short because this perception of Michigan State, but the matchup isn't very good either, right? Like, I know Mel Tucker doesn't want to get into a shootout, but it feels like he's going to need a shootout to stay within this, right? He's going to need a bad performance from Ohio State's defense to stay within this number because they're not going to get stops defensively. And so when I look at this line of 19, immediately I'm looking at our number, and we're at 21.2, which is just the core number, right? It doesn't factor in the good matchup. It doesn't factor in some of the injuries that we've mentioned, so you could probably tick it up a couple more notches than that. And listen, I think the story for Sparty has been awesome this year. And I like Mel Tucker, great recruiter. And I didn't want to say anything at the time because I prefer not getting crushed on social media from fans and biased homers. But when the playoff committee had Michigan State at 3, we have them power rated just barely inside the top 25. So the reality and the perception of what Michigan State is to the outside world is just vastly different than what pro bettors think of them.
A couple other things, too, before we close the book on this game. When you look at Ohio State last week, I know Purdue is a very public underdog. If I hear the term spoiler makers from any of our colleagues again, I'm going to lose my mind because as soon as a cliche catches on like that, a team's going to get boat raced. 59-31 on the scoreboard wasn't nearly as indicative as how dominant Ohio State was and that performance against Purdue. And you talked about all the Michigan State pass defense concerns and numbers. All we have to do is look at the schedule of opponents that Michigan has played. Cade McNamara threw for almost 400 yards against Michigan State. Cade McNamara hasn't thrown for more than 255 yards this season against anybody, and he was able to move the ball with ease against this Michigan State secondary. I think Ryan Day will be ready to go, and you're going to see Ohio State put on an absolute show. So buyer beware should you want to make a case for the underdog.
You and J.J. McCarthy have the same handler there?
J.J. McCarthy gets more reps than I do. So
everyone's just throwing Cade McNamara under the bus this year.
Cade's gone out there and has done what he's needed, and I give him credit. He's held off the charge despite all the boo birds that want JJ out there taking reps, but I don't think they'll argue with Michigan's success.
We're not even talking Michigan, and you're just throwing shots at him. I figured JJ's handler had you slip that in there.
Oh, that'll be the day. If anybody who wants to try and win a Heisman Trophy has us pushing propaganda, I'm more than happy to try and do that. We can share our Venmo, we can share our corporate accounts and all of that. We can push out odds and whatnot. From the Big Ten, though, Payne, we'll go out to the Pac-12, and another top 3 team finds themselves as an underdog this weekend. That, of course, being the Oregon Ducks, who go into Rice-Eccles Stadium, where it's the Utes, a 3.5-point home favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total on the game sits at 58.5. We can lay out the scenarios pretty quickly. Oregon just needs a win and Oregon State loss to secure the Pac-12 North title. Oregon would miss the Pac-12 title game if Oregon State won out and Oregon lost its next 2 games. Utah secures the Pac-12 South with a win or an Arizona State loss. And keep in mind, Oregon obliterated Utah in Utah's quest to get to the college football playoff back in 2019. This is a Utes team who has one of the more underrated home field advantages in all of the West Coast, specifically in the Pac-12. They won 7 out of the last 18 at home. The lone loss came last year in November to USC in an empty stadium. Utah has held those last 18 visitors to just 17 points per game by outscoring them by more than 18 a contest. They turn you over, they hit you in the mouth, and they make you not want to be there in the cold weather. Now, this isn't the same Utah defense we've seen in the past, Payne, but I'm going to be honest. I think Oregon, being very one-dimensional and talented in what they do running the football, they're going to need a little bit more out of Anthony Brown in the passing game if they're going to go into Salt Lake City and pull off the upset.
All this Oregon talk is making me sick. I think this is the 3rd straight week we've broken down a Ducks game. I feel like your buddy there, Jeff Schwartz, is paying you off to talk all this Ducks football here. What's going on?
I mean, you have to rein in Ducks hype that's out there. It's sweeping the nation, apparently. You have 7,000 jersey combinations. You have a quarterback that can't complete the forward pass. And here we are, the number 3 team in the country that pretty sure when our Bet the Board top 10 gets released later today, people are going to go, wait, Oregon still not in the top 10?
So I like Joe Moorhead. Damn good offensive mind. I don't necessarily think he'll get the Washington job, but his name's at least in the mix, and hopefully his health is improved enough so when he does at least interview for that job, they look at him seriously. And then you have the best offensive line in the country. That's basically what this is. Moorhead and an O-line are making life easy for a below-average quarterback and a subpar receiving group. Oregon's number 2 in the country in offensive line yards. 57% of the Ducks' run have gained at least 4 yards. That's 6th in the country. The reason the Ducks have an offense that's number 1 in 3rd and 4th down success rate is they're constantly in short yardage situations. So Utah, to your point, has to stop the run and force Anthony Brown and Oregon into 3rd and 5. If you can get Anthony Brown in 3rd and 5 prior to the green zone, you're going to have some defensive success here. You have to make Anthony Brown have an impact on this game, right? Like put him in, relatively speaking, uncomfortable situations, right? Hell, even if you get him in 3rd and 4 from his own 40, like that could be a pass down, right? If you look at Oregon's offense when they're in standard down situations, so basically there is a threat of run or pass, Oregon's got a 57% success rate on those downs. It's elite. You get Anthony Brown in known passing situations, and Oregon's 33% successful on passing downs. Now, the question we have, I think, is Utah's defense. It was the same one that we had against Arizona State, and it was, could the defensive line hold up? You had another offense there with a mobile quarterback that plays with the number advantage in the box. And the answer to that question the first 30 minutes was no. Arizona State came out 0.44 EPA per rush in the first quarter, 0.38 in the second quarter, both big numbers. You didn't get much defensively from Utah's front there in the first half. Now in the second half, Kyle Whittingham made an adjustment, went far more one high safety, loaded the box with defenders, made Jaden Daniels try to win through the air.
There's
After
the
that
key.
Adjustment was made.
There's the key you hit on. Make Jaden Daniels beat you.
Yes. And so that's the same philosophy here with Anthony Brown. So you look in the second half, Arizona State, after that adjustment, 25% success rate in the third quarter, 24% success rate in the fourth quarter. So that's about half of where you want to be as an offense. Utah's defensive line, they have been pushed around some, right? 67th in line yards, 89th in opportunity rate. But they're an aggressive D-line, right? They like to shoot gaps because they do a pretty good job stuffing runs. 23% stuff rate, 12th best mark in the country, but we know Oregon's offensive line number 1 in the country, not allowing runs to be stuffed. So that'll be a nice little battle there, but the key is loading the box, right? Like Utah has to be good enough on early downs to force Anthony Brown to be a passer, right? You're not going to beat Oregon if Anthony Brown has more rushing attempts than completions, which is what happened last week against Wazoo. If you're Oregon, you're not changing who you are unless you're forced to. And they've been getting some help. I think we've talked about this a little bit. You lose Verdell, all of a sudden, like we're asking, like, Ken Dye with his size and stature and composition being every down running back, he hasn't needed to be, right? The freshman, Byron Cardwell, he has been exactly what the Ducks need. He was fantastic last week. If you look, though, in this matchup, I think it's interesting. If you can get Cardwell going, right, give him 9 to 12 touches, that's probably a sign that Oregon's able to run the ball here. But then you can get Dye as the explosive back, but you can get him out of the backfield. We saw him catch a touchdown pass when Wazoo elected to blitz its linebackers. Same situation here. If you know Utah is stuffing the box and they have linebackers that want to play downhill, getting Dye out of the backfield in pass situations with the RPO on early downs might be a nice little wrinkle. It's an easier pass for Brown. And I don't necessarily like, we've been talking about running back runs forever, but where they're the best is on early downs, right? It's not 3rd and 6 dumping it off and hoping that your running back can make someone miss an open space. But you get that RPO game going and Utah being very aggressive with that, loading the box, then all of a sudden you get Dye out of the backfield. So I think that'll be something to watch for here, is if Oregon can get some easy throws and early downs for Dye and Anthony Brown. But ultimately this comes down to, can Oregon get stopped here, or rather can Utah get stops on early downs and then make Anthony Brown beat you? Like, you just have to make him a thrower. He's not very good. Even if you look, Todd, at whether it was last week or some of the full season metrics, when he throws with RPOs or play action, right, this is a positive EPA offense. Any other type of throw, it is a bottom barrel type passing offense. So in that 3rd and 5 situation, it's not just because Anthony Brown isn't a good passer. It really is. But suddenly the RPO passing doesn't necessarily work. Like, you're not going to get linebackers to bite on an RPO on 3rd and 8, right? they know the run is not coming at that point. So that's really where you have to have Oregon's offense operate.
The other injury to keep tabs on, too, it's not going to get potentially easier for Oregon to throw the ball downfield. Johnny Johnson was forced out of the Washington State game with an unspecified lower leg injury. Reading some of Mario's quotes and watching an interview with Joe Moorhead, they've been pretty coy about that, and it's not a team, as you kind of alluded to, that has a lot of depth or game breakers at the receiver position. So if you're Utah and you really only have to eliminate and neutralize Devin Williams, it makes it that much easier to commit an extra guy to the box and playing the run. And I'll tell Kyle Whittingham something I'm sure he already knows. Go back and watch the tape of what Cal did defensively with Justin Wilcox to make life difficult for Anthony Brown. Oregon had to work for absolutely everything, and as the field condenses and you can play more guys in the box, I really believe a win for Utah this week. Let Oregon move the ball between the 20s, force them to settle for field goals, and lean on your offense, because honestly, Payne, when you look at Utah, they've gone away from their DNA. We've grown accustomed to Utah being 3 yards in a cloud of dust when it comes to offense, leaning on a stingy defense and trying to win slugfest. But offensively, Cam Rising has given this team a shot in the arm. He's only been sacked 3 times and 233 dropbacks so far this season, which is extremely important when you deal with a pass rush led by Kayvon Thibodeau. And you look at how he's played at home against UCLA and Arizona State, a QBR of 85 and 92 in those games, 38 of 60, but they've gotten enough from Tavion Thomas and TJ Pledger in the ground game to lead me to believe that Oregon's defense should be put on notice. Utah's offense is going to challenge them all over the field.
That offense has been on fire lately. And since Cam Rising took over the starting job, the Utes have the most efficient passing attack in the Pac-12. And the thing Utah has going for it offensively is they can be multiple, right? You couple that efficient passing attack with a hammer like Tavion Thomas, And now it becomes difficult to game plan and pick and choose, where you want to allocate your defenders. Thomas was held out for precautionary reasons against Arizona. Whittingham claims he wants him rested for Oregon. Let's keep an eye on the status of that situation. But
that shit almost backfired on us.
Yes, I would tend to believe him there. You also have your center, Paul Maley, and your guard, Nick Ford. Whittingham was kind of mum on those two guys. They got banged up in the Arizona game, so let's, again, keep an eye on those two guys along the offensive line for Utah. The other two backs, you mentioned Pledger, Bernard, they can really contribute, not just on the ground, but as pass catchers as well. Bernard, I think, went 3 for 60 last week. Oregon's given up a ton of productive drives. They've struggled to get off the field on 3rd and 4th down. Now, Oregon's done a very good job limiting explosives, but you can still push them around in the trenches outside the top 50 in both line yards and stuff rate. So Tavion Thomas should be effective here if he goes. I want to believe Whittingham. I think the signs are positive there that he is going to play. You added that added dimension, right? Like with Cam Rising through the air. So it's just a very balanced attack right now. They're extremely difficult to stop. I mean, the kind of snafu they had at Oregon State, there was kind of, some flukiness with that and, some blocked punts and, I don't know, some situational football that didn't really go overly well for the offense. But overall, since Cam Rising's taken over, this is just a completely different offense. We'll have to see how Oregon holds up in coverage against Utah's backs and tight ends. Like, Sewell is a liability in coverage. Hill is kind of that hybrid safety linebacker for Oregon. He's also graded out very poorly in coverage. Oregon's graded out one of the worst P5 tackling defenses. And, I've said this for a while now. Sometimes these teams, you just get these elite pieces, and the market sometimes and the perception really just is completely different from reality. So as good as Kayvon Thibodeau is, and because the quarterback class is so weak, it's very possible he's the number 1 pick in the draft coming up. But Kayvon Thibodeau is going to get doubled. He's going to get chipped. Oregon, despite having him 121st in the country in passing down stack rate. So even when the Ducks get opponents in known passing situations, they don't get after the quarterback overly well. So Cam Rising should have time here. The other thing that's interesting is, as well as Kayvon Thibodeau's playing right now, and he's certainly trending much better than where he started, and obviously was dealing with some injuries and whatnot, but he's gotten healthier. The defense overall has gotten a little bit healthier, and all we've heard from Ducks fans recently is like the unit is really improving. I think it has some, right? You hold Washington State to 43% success, Washington in a monsoon to 28% success, and Colorado to 46% success. You would expect a defense, right, with this kind of talent to improve by week 10 with a new defensive coordinator, right? You should be better in week 10 than in week 1 learning a new system with a new DC. But this improvement has come against Washington State's offense, which is outside the top 60 in EPA per play. Colorado's barely inside the top 100 in the same category. And then you have our beloved Washington Huskies, Todd. And, you're smarter than me. You finished college. If you can figure out this math equation, horrific offense plus horrific weather conditions equals what kind of offensive performance for Washington?
Subpar, to say the least.
So, I mean, yes, I think we're seeing some improvement, but I don't want to just be like, oh my God, Oregon's figured it out defensively. Obviously, ton of respect for Tim DeRuyter, the guy who was cashing his tickets right and left at Cal because of his defense. And he's got more talent to work with here. And I think they are starting to figure some things out. And they had, a fantastic start in the Ohio State game on the road, which ultimately built them a lead large enough to hold on late. But I don't think it's like this great defense. And I'm certainly not using the barometer for improvement beating Washington in a monsoon, right? And holding that offense in check and Wazoo. And, when you look at Colorado offensively, again, barely inside the top 100 in EPA, holding them to a 46% success rate isn't some monumental achievement. So this is a far tougher test here, going on the road, hostile environment against a Utah offense.
No doubt about it. I think if you look back over the course of their Pac-12 schedule, the only offense that they've played that you'd really respect how a defense performed was UCLA in the Rose Bowl, a game where they gave up 31 points and had to come from behind to win that game late after UCLA's starting quarterback, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, was unable to finish. So could be a jolt to the system in this game. Final note, Payne, before we move on, as I know our listeners that have been with us all season long obviously have a vested interest in Utah for this particular spot, even without betting the game, knowing their win total hangs in the balance. And I'm sure there were some folks that read the tea leaves that we suggested Utah was a worthwhile underdog to potentially win the league. When you look at this particular number, fair or foul with Utah a 3-point favorite?
I think to the outside world, it is probably foul, and I have no doubt in my mind that Oregon is likely going to be a public dog. But the number 3 is perfect. And I think we will actually see sharp bettors gravitate towards Utah in this matchup. I mean, I just kind of want to put this in perspective. You mentioned Oregon being 3rd in the college football playoff. Georgia's a 17-point favorite on a neutral against Oregon, and the matchup would be horrific because their defensive line would stalemate Oregon's offensive line. You'd have Anthony Brown throwing on 3rd and 7, which would turn into a nightmare. That's kind of where Oregon is, right? Like, we all watch ESPN, right, and we see Oregon number 3. It's like, Georgia's a 17-point favorite on a neutral, and it's a terrible matchup on top of that. Like, that's the Oregon team, right? And odds makers and bettors are cognizant of that, and that's why Utah is a 3-point favorite in this game.
There's no doubt that odds makers tell you one story, popularity polls can tell you something very different. And for everyone out there listening, you know which one you should probably pay much more attention to. From 2 games with deep dives, as always, we have a couple games still to go, but want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, one team on the outside looking in for the college football playoff discussion would be the Cincinnati Bearcats, and they find themselves at home on Saturday playing host to the SMU Mustangs, laying 11.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game sits at 64.5. 30-plus seniors will be honored in their final Bearcat home game. Luke Fickell has not been shy about talking about the importance of this class, calling a lot of these kids very special in what they've done to help build the program. And I found this note fascinating, that 4th-year seniors during their career as members of this Bearcats program, 41-6. UC's 5th-year seniors have gone 45-14. And then you have kids that have been on campus for 6 years, when Tommy Tuberville left them high and dry, essentially, to go on to whatever the hell he's doing now as a U.S. Senator. So interesting to see what Luke Fickell has done to create some stability there. The Bearcats will come into this game riding in a 13-game American Athletic Conference win streak, 36 straight wins against unranked opponents. And when you look at the way the Bearcats have performed, I mean, this is a team that's gotten by on defense. You wouldn't know that the last couple of weeks, as they've been very susceptible on the ground. But when you talk SMU football, it's all about Tanner Mordecai and their ability to attack in space over the top.
Remember when we broke this game down last year? Looking over my notes, the key factor is the same from last season. And is SMU going to be able to move the ball through the air? And what I've seen the last few seasons are the teams in the AAC that might be able to compete with Cincinnati match up terribly with the Bearcats because they're all pass-first teams. SMU is a pass-first offense, obviously, with Sonny Dykes. Be interesting to see what his future holds. And the pass rate has only increased the last 3 weeks for SMU. The problem with that strategy is the strength of Cincinnati's defense is the secondary. Like, they have 3 horses there. You have Cook, Bryant, and Sauce Gardner. They've graded out the 3 best defenders on Cincinnati's defense. They all play in the secondary, right? It's why the Bearcats are 6th in EPA per pass allowed. That trio, I was digging into this last night, only 47% of targets have been caught combined against those 3. Just 1 touchdown. 7 picks and 16 pass breakups for those 3. When opposing quarterbacks target those 3, Cook, Bryant, and Gardner, their passer rating is 37. So, maybe SMU changes some things up a little bit. They did become a little bit more run heavy earlier in the season when they were facing some of the dregs. You mentioned Cincinnati struggling a little bit on the ground defensively the last few weeks. Maybe they change things up and show a little bit more of a balanced attack. That's probably the right way to go about this. But, I mean, I look at this and it's just like, a lot of people are, and I think because it's on the national stage with Cincinnati, right there on the cusp of inclusion in the playoff, a lot is being made of the schedule, the strength of schedule for Cincinnati. But, these teams play in the same conference, right? And the AAC's down, obviously. So SMU is kind of faced with those same questions. And a lot of the sharp guys that I speak to, the word fraud's being thrown around in regards to SMU. Now, I know early in the season, based upon the schedule, there's a lot of sharp money over their win total. But in terms of how things have played out and who they've beaten, how they've beaten them, there are some serious question marks with SMU. And I look at SMU's defenses, right, that they've faced. Obviously important when assessing a pass-first offense. 4 defenses outside the top 105 in EPA per pass allowed that SMU has faced this season. Just 1 defense inside the top 50 in schedule-adjusted EPA pass defense with Houston. SMU lost that game and trailed at one point by 3 scores. Cincinnati's far and away the best passing defense SMU's played. Now, there is some positive news. It looks like SMU's leading receiver, who has a 20% passing usage rate, Danny Gray, is apparently going to play. Sonny Dykes said on Tuesday he's been battling a couple of injuries, but he should be good to go. What is interesting, right, and it's more from the market side of things, Cincinnati hasn't covered in 4 straight games. The market doesn't seem to love them. A couple guys I speak with number grabbed SMU plus 13 or better. But Todd, I think if this somehow got to an area that slipped to 9.5, and maybe it eventually gets worked on to get there, I think we're going to have a vastly different sentiment if Cincinnati minus 9.5 pops into this market.
It's always one of those things that's interesting because Cincinnati, to your point, such a public team. Everybody has talked about them since the college football playoff rankings were released about, oh, you need style points, you need this, you need that. And you wonder on some level, never having been in this spot, or at least I haven't, how much that weighs on you when you start thinking about margin of victory rather than doing the little things. I would make the case that Cincinnati at this point can only focus on one thing, and that's winning football games, trying to go 13-0, and flipping it to the committee saying, you know what, we've done everything we can. You've seen upsets all over the college football landscape. If you want, keep us out. But suddenly a road win against what could potentially be an 11-1 Notre Dame team may be one of the best non-conference wins that a top 5 team could have that finishes the season undefeated. So I think all you can do is take care of the task at hand. And like you talked about, I mean, SMU, so much of what they want to do is through the air. Let's see if they will stay committed to Ulysses Bentley or Trey Siggers. But I can see a scenario where we finally get the Bearcats to unleash some of what they've been harnessing, and Desmond Ridder goes out there and moves the football with ease against an SMU defense.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this a little bit, and you can only control what you can control. It wasn't Cincinnati's fault that Indiana had a backup quarterback in that game, right? Like, it's not Cincinnati's fault that UCF's quarterback went down. So, I mean, that's the toughest part about this is when we're just like yelling to the clouds that they haven't played anybody. We know the AAC's down a little bit, but the teams that they've tried to schedule, and they just had some unfortunate breaks, right? Like the Indiana, if you get Indiana that we all thought, it looks like a better win, right? If UCF's horse doesn't go down at quarterback, like that's a better win. And I don't know. It's always difficult, right, trying to assess this whole thing, and I don't really want to get into the college football playoff talk, right? We all know Alabama's better than Cincinnati, right? If that were the only merit.
Yeah, 100%.
Like it's tough because you do want to have that balance of being cognizant that, a 2-win team might be better placed in the college football playoff than a team that beats absolutely nobody. At the same time, I really think that game last year against Georgia should be a little bit of an indicator that, like, hey, Cincinnati can hang with the big boys, right? And they want Notre Dame to go out and run the table, as you alluded to, right? You want SMU after this week to go out and win a couple more games. It's just difficult, right? Like, I understand Cincinnati hasn't really looked great the last few weeks, but this feels like an interesting spot to me, where, again, like we had some number grabbers grab SMU, but I just, what I am hearing is potentially if this were to slip to 9.5, that Cincinnati's going to be the side. So nothing for me at this juncture, at this number, but things will get mightily interesting if this were to slip below double digits.
It's always interesting because in college basketball, we know that the little guy can schedule whoever he wants. They'll play on a neutral field. But when college football schedules are done 8 to 10 years in advance, there's nobody going to Nippert Stadium to play Cincinnati. And one of the Power 5 programs have to gain years ago going, you know what, I'm Alabama. Let's schedule Cincinnati on a neutral field. It doesn't carry the cachet. You're better off beating a Power 5 program like Miami that may be a doormat than anything else. So there's obviously some noise in all of this. But what I do find extremely interesting, as Oklahoma State will continue to get more support, and rightfully so, maybe for their potential inclusion in the college football playoff, they don't get dinged for a close win at home against Tulsa, but Cincinnati gets dinged for a close win at home against Tulsa. So it's just funny when you look at some of the political forces in play there. But different discussion for a different day. And from the AAC, let's head out to the ACC, where Wake Forest goes into Death Valley to take on the Clemson Tigers. It's Clemson, a 4.5-point favorite. Total in the game, 57.5. The Deacons have only won 9 games twice in school history. They'll get 2 cracks to get to the 10-win mark for the first time. If they split their final 2 games, they would also win the division. First ever 6-0 start in conference in school history for Dave Clawson's bunch. It's the second time they've won 6 league games in program history. The other came back in 2006. Meanwhile, on the flip side, Clemson trying to avoid losing 3 conference games for the first time since 2010. When you look at Wake, they're the only team in the nation to score 35 points per game. They've done it against a schedule that's paper thin, in my opinion, and relatively fortunate to get by NC State last week in a 45-42 victory. But when you look at Wake, Payne, they have a dynamic offense led by Sam Hartman. Clemson has a dynamic defense that has been outstanding all season long, shown a little bit of vulnerability when they took on a team like Pittsburgh, but in their own building with everything to play for, I think this matchup should be worth its weight in gold at noon Eastern.
Yeah, this is good on good, right? Hartman versus Clemson's defense. And Hartman, I believe, 7th in total EPA for quarterbacks. Clemson's still a top 5 defense in EPA per play allowed and productive drives allowed. It's a fun matchup. Hartman's coming off his worst game of the season, though. Right? Like, one of the weirder games you'll see from a quarterback in offensive perspective. Like, Wake only had a 39% success rate against NC State. Hartman completed less than 43% of his passes. Wake's ground game, negative EPA per rush, and somehow they still hung 45 on the best defense they've played this season. And, you know, I know NC State's been dealing with some defensive injuries, but yeah, still a good unit. It was just one of the more bizarre games. By the box score, Wake certainly lost. Clemson is a little bit of a different animal, and I know they've also dealt with their fair share of defensive injuries. Couple guys out in the front 7. We know they're down offensively, but defensively still elite. Venables, if you've listened to his presser this week, he knows what he's up against. This is the type of matchup where he's been like, hey, we need to be disciplined down to down, and we just need to execute. And he basically said the same thing that we've been saying about Wake's offense, in that it's not overly complex, right? Like, sure, there's some intricate stuff with their blocking schemes where they'll, pull a tackle up the middle, but for the most part, like, it's an RPO system, right? They hold the mesh point for as long as possible to put your defense in conflict. The vast majority of the plays, they are designed to look the same. Wake's just really good executing it, right? A lot of veteran guys, a lot of smart kids, right, that are executing this offense. Now, the matchup last season, I know it's different. Wake scored only 3 non-garbage time points. And Venables kind of hinted that everything looks the same as it did last year. Just the guys are older, they execute better. And I quote, Hartman's a baller. So, I mean, let's see what Clemson comes up with here. They haven't created the most havoc with their front 7 like they have in years past. They're not getting their, typical push up front. But Clemson's still very good at the line of scrimmage. They still have to win that battle, right? 17th in line yards. So they really still hold up well, right? Even though their horses are, you have Breece, who's out. It's a big loss, obviously, but he's been out for a while. They've adapted to life without him. If you have a good defensive line, you can impact Wake's offense, right? Because they hold the ball so long at that mesh point. You can get your hands up, tip a bunch of passes, drive that O-line back. If Clemson can stop the run with 5, and you get disciplined play out of your linebackers, and keep an eye on that. Clemson doesn't have the best coverage linebackers. But if you can get those two things, it's going to be tough for Wake's offense. And it's also worth mentioning here, and you kind of hinted at this, is the schedule dichotomy. Wake Forest has played one defensive line in the top 40 in line yards. Clemson's played three offenses inside Bill Connolly's top 25 S&P+. Right? So there is this massive scheduling difference here. And, right now, this game probably isn't for me. But we talk all the time about lines painting pictures and telling stories. You have a 3-loss Clemson team that nobody seems to want. Couldn't cover against lowly Connecticut. Wake Forest has this great story. Even though they lost, one game, still 10th in the college football playoff race. Clemson's a 4.5-point favorite, right? And I don't even need to look, Todd, right? Like, casual bettors are going to be running over men, women, and children to get Wake as a dog here. But you start to have like these market inefficiencies. And I understand Clemson is vastly different than it was last year. Not quite as good defensively, and obviously an abomination on offense. But Clemson was a 35-point favorite at Wake last year, right? And now you have a venue flip where Clemson's at home, and they're just a 4-point favorite this year. My gut says this line kind of trickles up a little bit. We'll see, if the public evens that out, and odds makers have to adjust for all the public money on the dog. But just an interesting game where the line certainly tells a lot.
I've done power ratings, not nearly as extensively as some folks in the industry or as long. I've made adjustments for quarterback downgrades and cluster injuries, but I'm not sure I've ever made a 39-point adjustment from Trevor Lawrence handing the baton to DJ Ungalele. Although, to your point, anyone who goes 21 of 44 with a 48% completion rate and a season-high 240 yards passing against UConn, probably not exactly a ringing endorsement. The other thing, it appears that Justin Ross is going to have surgery on his foot. Clemson hadn't made any official determinations from what I'd read, but, an offense that struggled now loses its top playmaker, 46 catches, 514 yards out of the mix. But according to Dabo this week, it does appear that Will Shipley and Kobe Pace will be back in the fold for this one. So just things to keep in mind as you look to try and handicap. I know a lot of our listeners will be forced to make a pick on this game for various office pools and such. So if you want,
gotcha.
Yeah, no. If you want to go contrarian, I think to your point, you may be able to make up some ground on your competition by laying the points with Clemson if you want to think outside the box a bit.
Oh yeah, if you're in contest pools and you're trying to make up ground, right? Sometimes it becomes not necessarily about the game in and of itself, but the way you need to navigate contests. There is some strategy involved other than hey, let's just pick the winner, and being able to make up ground on sides that you would at least lean to, right? And if you lean to Clemson, right, knowing the entire pool will probably be on Wake Forest, that's certainly the better way to navigate things than just grabbing a stale number on another game that the rest of the contest is probably going to also have, where you're not able to make up ground that way.
Yep, no doubt about it, especially as you get into the latter stages of some of those pools out there. As we know, people like to get skin in the game a variety of ways, and it's not just always betting into the dynamic markets available to you at FanDuel Sportsbook. All right, to the SEC, Payne. Arkansas, Alabama. I believe this is the SEC game of the week on CBS, and it's the Alabama Crimson Tide, more than a 3-touchdown favorite, 21.5 the going number at FanDuel right now. Total in the game, 58.5. The last win in this series for Arkansas came way back in 2006, the year before Nick Saban arrived to Tuscaloosa to change the fates of the proud program there. Bama has scored at least 40 points in each of the last 5 meetings versus Arkansas. The last 2 meetings have been a combined score of 100 points for Alabama to 10 for the Razorbacks. Arkansas has now lost 16 straight games versus teams ranked in the AP top 5. 10 of those 16 losses came against Alabama. When you look at the Crimson Tide, if there are questions about this Alabama team, clearly it's about their offensive line and their inability to consistently run the football. That job's probably not going to get that much easier as they lost one of their depth running backs in Roy Dell Williams, meaning Bama's down to just 2 scholarship backs on their roster. As you begin to figure out Alabama's attack plan, not only for this game, but what we'll see in the Iron Bowl and, of course, the SEC Championship game in a few weeks, Bryce Young has been asked to take on a lot of the responsibility, Payne. he's going to go up against a defensive coordinator that we've seen throw some wrinkles at young quarterbacks in the past. Do you think Barry Odom has anything in the tank to try and slow down Alabama? Probably not to win this game outright, but to keep the Razorbacks in it for a full 4 quarters.
I think that's the big question, right? Like, Arkansas's defense kept them in the game last week at Death Valley, held LSU to a 9% success rate on passing downs, shut down the explosive play in the second half. That's going to have to be the case again this week to stay within the 3-touchdown spread at Alabama. And, this isn't really anything new. We've talked about Barry Odom's defense before, and he's a really good defensive mind. And, he's got a style that you don't always see, although it's becoming a little bit more prevalent now with all the spread attacks. But, the rush 3 drop 8 defense has confused a lot of quarterbacks, a lot of young quarterbacks in the past. Odom does have some pieces now where he can rush 4 and 5. So Arkansas can be more versatile there. But for the most part, this is still an Arkansas defense that plays with, 5, 6 or more defensive backs on the field. And their goal is to mix and match their coverages and give different looks pre-snap than what actually is coming post-snap. Confuse quarterbacks, right? Lure them into some mistakes. And it's worked in some big spots. Picked Matt Corral off 6 times last year. Really confused 2 young quarterbacks earlier this season in Hudson Card and Zach Calzada. No doubt. Bryce Young appears far better than the latter 2, but he's still young. He's still learning. There's still going to be some, bumps along the way. But what is interesting stylistically is Bryce Young has been willing to take what you give him, right? He's shown to be the quarterback that can beat this kind of defense, right? He's not going to put the ball in harm's way. He's difficult to confuse. Just 1.8% of his passes have been turnover worthy, only 3 picks on the season. Bryce Young's style isn't one where, he necessarily gets frustrated because you're not giving him the easy, explosive, over-the-top pass that allows Bama to score in 1 or 2 plays. He's willing to throw it short and intermediate. And I look at his numbers. That's actually where Bryce Young has been best, in those short and intermediate windows. On passes beyond the line of scrimmage that don't travel 20 or more yards, Bryce Young has a 143 passer rating, 22 touchdowns, 1 pick, only 2 turnover-worthy throws on 192 attempts in that window area. The other thing worth mentioning here is, Bryce Young and Alabama played a similar style defense in Ole Miss back in Week 5, and Bryce Young didn't really need to be a factor in that game because Bama was able to move the ball on the ground against a light box, and obviously Arkansas plays that similar style. Now, give Arkansas credit, and as I mentioned, they have more SEC talent along the defensive line, and because of that, they are top 40 in line yards, stuff rate, and EPA per rush allowed. But I do think Alabama is able to have some traction on the ground here, Todd, if they're constantly seeing 3 and 4 and 5-man fronts from Arkansas. So, you want to go into this game and be like, Alabama hasn't looked the best prior to the bye, came out, didn't really beat anybody. There's some holes there defensively. There's some holes offensively. They don't have, the cast of weapons they've had in years prior. But just stylistically, you would think Alabama's going to be able to do enough to move the ball on the ground in light boxes. And the way Bryce Young is operated passing the ball, he's not the kind of guy that needs to hit 20-yard passes or he gets frustrated. He's more than willing to take that check down. And that typically is the way you beat a defense like this.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure on the other side either what Arkansas can do to consistently move the ball against Alabama. I know when Arkansas played the number 2 team in the country at the time, Georgia's still better defensively than Alabama, but they never really put together a threat whatsoever. KJ Jefferson wasn't able to make some of the decisions he needed to, or their chunk plays just weren't available. And, listening to you talk about Bryce Young, and this may sound like a hot take, but I'll throw it out there anyways. I'll make the claim, Payne, that what we're seeing from Bryce Young this year is much more impressive on a game-to-game basis than what we saw from Mac Jones last year. Because when I watch Alabama this season, and this isn't to knock John Mechie, who's been the short guy, versus Jamison Williams as the deep threat, the weapons that the Crimson Tide have available for Bryce Young are nowhere close to what Mac Jones had at his disposal last season in Alabama's romp to the national title.
Yeah. I think it's more so the offensive line, right? That's kind of the one area we've pegged.
They can take Alex Leatherwood back from the Raiders if they want him.
you lost Landon Dickerson. You lost some guys along the offensive line that certainly aren't as good this year. I would say that Devontae Smith and Najee Harris are certainly better than what Alabama currently has at this juncture, no doubt about that. I am obviously a Mac Jones guy, so I'm not going to throw shade on him. And, we've kind of made these comparisons year after year with Alabama. It's like, last year Mac Jones was better than Tua the year before. And he wasn't throwing to 4 NFL receivers. He was just throwing to 1 after Jalen Waddle went down early. So
I don't want to say
it's always that weird debate. But I would say, like you, at least in their current form, right? There's a ton of talent, right? Like, let's not. We don't want to play the sob game for Alabama.
No.
They have a ton of weapons. Just they're not quite developed to be as impactful yet.
And this isn't throwing shade at Mac Jones by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying that Bryce Young, I think, is doing quite a bit. We know why he was the highest rated recruit that Nick Saban had ever brought into the quarterback position. And I can tell you, watching Mac week over week in the National Football League, there's a coach on the West Coast, and Kyle Shanahan, that I'm sure would much rather have Mac Jones leading his offense than the direction that organization went in Trey Lance, as you wonder what could have been, what should have been, or maybe even Jets fans will see if the Zach Wilson experience pays off. But it's just a credit to a consummate, mature quarterback and what Bryce has brought for a lot of the reasons you outlined, that he's not surrounded with that elite building block offensive line and skill position talent. And
Flacco this week.
And we'll get a better idea of what Bryce can do when he's under duress in a couple weeks when they take on Georgia for the SEC title game. But yes, Joe Flacco, for those scoring at home, will make it a start in a National Football League game. Thankfully, it comes against your Dolphins, though, Payne. We have seen Joe, though, put up good performances in the past.
What is going on there?
Not quite sure. Not quite sure.
Oof. Tough sledding there. Tough sledding. Not a fan of that coach, but we will see how it unfolds.
One final game to go, and it'll take us to Norman, Oklahoma, where a now once beaten Oklahoma team will welcome in Matt Campbell and the Iowa State Cyclones. Oklahoma, a 3.5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game sits at 60.5. The Sooners were denied their first 10-0 start since 2014 last weekend in a game where their offense looked ill-equipped to do anything, something that you pointed out in our breakdown on this very podcast about Dave Aranda having a hex of sorts, or the wherewithal to slow down Lincoln Riley and what Oklahoma wanted to do. Meanwhile, the Cyclones, they limp into this game after allowing a season-high 42 points last week in Lubbock, the most points they'd allowed in a game since 2019. When you look at Iowa State, we know what Breece Hall can bring from the offensive side of things. He was held to a season low last week versus Texas Tech, but in a career against Oklahoma, 3 games, 328 rushing yards, nearly 5 yards per carry, and 4 rushing touchdowns. He'll put his streak of 22 straight games with a rushing score on the line, but I don't think people care about Breece Hall and Brock Purdy and the Cyclones offense against OU's defense. I think all eyes will be on what the Cyclones can do to either replicate what Baylor put on tape a week ago, or will Caleb Williams and this Oklahoma offense bounce back, still with a ton to play for, knowing they control their own destiny to get to the Big 12 championship game.
That's what's fun about this matchup, is being able to see who rebounds, right? You have a freshman quarterback in Caleb Williams, or is it a Cyclones defense, and specifically a secondary that's veteran-led and has really underperformed in a big way this season. When you look at Caleb Williams and the potential for a bounce back here, listen, he's uber talented. He can run, he can throw. He's got all the traits. And, he's going to have some ups and downs. He's going to have some lulls. There's going to be games where we know, he isn't the most accurate passer. And as a freshman, that's not going to be something that is, his massive strength. But there's also a mental side to this. And that's something that we have to find out if Caleb Williams can overcome, right? Because he knows now that at the very first sign of adversity, Coach yanked me. And Lincoln Riley yanked me for a guy that won't be in our program in a couple weeks. And so there is this mental hurdle there. And I don't know Caleb Williams. I don't know his people. I don't know his mental makeup, right? I don't have any inclination into that, although I'd been poking around trying to find out. But let's see how that shakes out. Now, obviously, Caleb Williams wasn't good against Baylor, like 12% turnover-worthy throw rate, 37 passer rating. But he's got to refocus now. And you hit this perfectly. Just because the college football playoff berth is off the table for Oklahoma, they can still win the Big 12 championship. They still control their own destiny with that. And the way to beat Iowa State this season is through the air. The Cyclones have not been their usual self defending passes. They're also really not their usual self against the run either. But you can really make some splash plays throwing it. Iowa State's outside the top 75 in both passing success rate and EPA per pass allowed. And it's wild, right? Because they play this 4-2-5, and all 5 of the starting guys in the secondary are upperclassmen, and somehow last week against a 3-star freshman labeled as an athlete, not even a quarterback, Donovan Smith making his first start at Texas Tech, had a 90% adjusted accuracy rate. And when Smith was kept clean, 10.6 an attempt, 96% adjusted accuracy, 151 passer rating against the Cyclone secondary. So something's got to get figured out there. Obviously, a little bit of a down spot. But if Caleb Williams can shake the mental side of things, there's an opportunity here for him to bounce back against Iowa State. Now, I wouldn't expect the same shoddy performance that we got from Iowa State's defense and secondary. They tend to play to the level of their competition. But if you look stylistically, Caleb Williams is going to have some opportunities to take advantage of this Cyclones defense through the air. I look last week, it wasn't just on Caleb, right? And you hit this, again, you brought this up, and we don't need the pat on the back, but like Dave Aranda has given Lincoln Riley fits in recent meetings. That's 3 in a row now. And so that's
I am, by the way,
not all on Caleb Williams.
I am, by the way, entertained. Nobody brings that up before the game other than us. Everyone else decides they want to use that as their talking point after the game. Because we all know it's always great. Yeah, that hindsight is always 20/20, and you can use that information after the fact to really make money in this business. But go ahead, I digress.
I don't listen. Excuse me. Is that a like a radio thing or something going on?
Yeah, I saw it circulate on some, from college football writers, not necessarily gambling people and folks that don't profess to be, but it's always funny after you get that additional data point, then, oh my God, it's a thing. Give me that thing before the game actually takes place and I can do something with it.
So, we mentioned that. So, it's not all on Caleb Williams, right? I mean, he's a freshman. And then you had the Sooners drop 3 balls in some critical situations. You also had, if you go back and, I rewatched the game, the refs were certainly letting Baylor play physically in the secondary. And Baylor plays far more press than Iowa State plays. And the Cyclones are kind of built to keep everything in front. They play softer coverage. So, you do have that situation where like Caleb Williams will probably have, the ability to like see the receiver, right? Kind of have confidence in like, hey, receiver's open because they play soft coverage versus like guys that are getting manned and beaten up physically. And suddenly, you have to go into your second and third and fourth read, and that can be uncomfortable on the road for a young quarterback. And so that situation may not present itself based upon the style that Iowa State secondary plays with. Now, Todd, this number, boy, oh boy, I don't know. This one says Oklahoma's dead and buried here.
Yeah, it says Oklahoma may as well not show up because the Cyclones win this game going away.
Yeah, that is what the number says. And just kind of, even with a 2-point downgrade for Oklahoma off last week's game, like, we make this game 5 plus home field advantage. So I don't know what's going to happen here. Sometimes, right, you can't just have a blindfold on to all other circumstances and just like bet the number. And I know a lot of guys do that because they trust in the number and, over enough positions, right? Over 500 bets, 1,000 bets, 2,000
You're a high
bets.
volume guy. You're fine doing that.
The number's going to even itself out. But this opened at 5, which was a touch short, and it's been nothing but Iowa State money. And so it'll be interesting to see come game day what this looks like, right? Like if it gets down to 3 and holds 3, or does it get down to 3 and then we see a wave of money when limits are highest on Oklahoma? That'll be interesting to kind of see that unfold. But the number in the early action indicate that this is Iowa State's Super Bowl in Oklahoma after losing last week, just no shows.
The craziest part about this, for those of us that aren't Oklahoma fans that have an investment in Oklahoma from before the season to win the conference, that even with an Oklahoma loss in this particular spot, as long as Kansas State helps out the situation against Baylor, and another number that suggests Baylor will not be at its absolute best in back-to-back weeks, Oklahoma would still be in a spot where they would just, and I say that facetiously because we know it won't be easy, beat Oklahoma State next week to have a setup where they would essentially play the Cowboys in back-to-back weeks. So interesting conference race to watch. I think that's why the Big 12 does things as well as anybody, that it's a full round robin with 10 teams where they play 9 games against one another and you very much control your own destiny. But you are 100% right when you look at a number that opens what appears to be short and there's nothing but one-way traffic on the underdog. We'll see if there's a late move on Oklahoma come game day. But given how it was one-way traffic last week against the Sooners and it didn't matter how low that number got, it continued to see money flow in on Baylor. Not quite sure the narrative will change this week, so probably not music to the ears of Oklahoma fans that may tune in to this very podcast. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You, of course, can follow me there as well. Most importantly, follow the podcast at BetTheBoardPod. FanDuel.com/BetTheBoard. Take advantage of your $1,000 risk-free bet. If you've done that each of the last couple of weeks from the Bet the Board podcast best bets, you've been able to put your money up. You've been able to double it without much of a sweat. Also 30-1 enhanced odds on some of the biggest NFL games and a variety of other ways to try and put your money to work for you each and every night throughout the course of the week. Payne, it's been a good run around these parts on the NFL and on college football. It's time to put our win streak on the line. Where have we identified an investable opportunity this weekend in the ranks of college football?
So a couple things before we get to the best bet. Again,
I forgot housekeeping. Go ahead.
Yep, I will announce this. No podcast next Monday. We will be doing a one piece of content week where we, as our loyal listeners know, combine NFL and college football. Likely release either late Tuesday or sometime early Wednesday. We're still kind of playing out our travel schedule, so we won't have an independent college football podcast next week. It'll be a joint. Also, Monday the 29th will be our 400th episode. We're going to do something, a nice little contest giveaway that is on Twitter. We will also be running another, like we do a lot, Apple Podcast contest giveaway. So go into Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review. You're automatically entered. We'll give away cash to 3 people at random that have left a 5-star review. So get those in there, and we'll announce that as well on Monday the 29th. So a lot of contest giveaways. It's this time of year, Thanksgiving. We love and appreciate the loyal listeners. Now to the part that everyone actually wants to hear. This is a really tough board, right? And, we don't necessarily go into how the sausage is made. And let me just be candid. Like, Wednesdays suck for doing this because you're not getting the best of the numbers on the number grabs early on Monday. And you're also not getting the confirmation on some of the sides you like because we're waiting till Fridays when limits increase to bet some of this stuff. So we operate in no man's land on early Wednesday morning. In saying that, Todd, you and I spoke. There is a side that we both agree upon. It is certainly ugly, but it makes a ton of sense. There is some value in the number, but I think this is more a matchup perception angle than anything. And it's 384 Navy plus the points. 4 is the number here. It's very possible this could trend up a touch. We will grade it at Navy plus 4, but effectively what you have here is a situation where you look at the matchup. We know Navy is a run-first team. East Carolina, their weakness on defense is against the run. You have East Carolina, who just became bowl eligible with an upset win at Memphis last week for the first time since, I believe, 2015, Todd?
Yep, I think so. I think 2015, 2016 bowl season. I always get that shit confused.
Yep, and then you have in 6 days from this game, you get to play potentially some hero ball against Cincinnati. And so if you listen to some of the presser from the East Carolina players and coaches, last week's game, the upset in overtime, was like a Super Bowl win for them. This is the first time these players will be going to a bowl game. Navy, on the other hand, has had 2 weeks to prepare for East Carolina. And if you look at the 2-7 record for Navy, you're going to be like, oh my God, this team is horrific. But they have played nothing but top shelf competition, relatively speaking, right? They've played every AAC big boy. Who did they play out of conference, Todd?
They played the
I thought it was another big school.
Yeah, they played Marshall. They played Notre Dame. And they played the service academies. Right. Yep, those are their 4 non-conference.
So it's like, they have just gone for Navy against a gauntlet of a schedule. And so that's why this line is what it is. So, slight value in the number, a great spot and situation, and I think a very good matchup here for Navy. So let's take the points with Navy this week, plus the 4. Again, I don't think this is one, Todd, that potentially has a ton of movement here.
Yep.
And it potentially could trickle even up a touch as you look at some of the sharp spots where the juice is going, but we'll call it 4.
To my knowledge, building on your strength of schedule statement there, Navy has played 9 games this season. 8 teams on their schedule as it stands now are already bowl eligible. If Tulsa were to win out, Tulsa would mean the first 9 opponents that Navy played this season all were bowl eligible. They'll, of course, play Temple, which we know won't be bowl eligible, but Army, who already is. So Navy could go through their schedule playing 11 teams that are going to play postseason games. I'm not sure by group of 5 standards there's a more difficult and grueling schedule. So let's hope, like you said, that week off, the situational component, and the fact that ECU may not want to deal with ankle biters diving at their knees and ankles all game long to try and stop the option works in our favor in this particular spot.
Here's what's interesting to your point. Like, we've kind of hammered the scheduling factor, but Navy right now, 18th toughest schedule in the entire country to this point. And the other interesting angle here is you hinted and you kind of mentioned Tulsa. Tulsa and ECU prior to last week, we had dead even in our power ratings, right? It would have been a pick 'em on a neutral. Navy went into Tulsa and won that game outright. So you also have this level of we've played this competition level before and we've beaten them. It's just like, hey, we're 2-7 because we've just faced an absolute brutal schedule. Top 20 in the country, which is, again, to your point, just wild for a team like Navy.
And the answer, by the way, is the last bowl game ECU played in was the Birmingham Bowl back in the 2015 Birmingham Bowl that was played in 2016. So it has been a while for the Pirates to go since the David Garrard days to the postseason. So we'll see what we get from the middies going forward. You talked about all the housekeeping and all the great promotions we have going on. Also want to remind our loyal listeners the best way, one of the ways they can show their support as well. We do have our Bet the Board store. We don't push a lot of our merch, but there's plenty of great stuff there. If you're looking for those hard to shop for members of the family, your friends or colleagues, nothing says family, friends, in the holiday season like donning the black and orange, the signature colors of Bet the Board. Any final words of wisdom, life advice you'd like to share on a scale of 1 to 10? How nervous are you about Florida State's trip to Chestnut Hill this weekend, or anything else you'd want to get off your chest?
Very nervous. It would have just been so much simpler had you not given up a Hail Mary to Jacksonville State. Then you just need to go 1 and 2. That's it. But I got to tell you, you somehow go 2-0 and beat Florida in the swamp to become bowl eligible. We already know what Mike Norvell and his staff is doing on the recruiting trail, right? You win 3 games last year. You start this season 0-4, and somehow you have the 13th best recruiting class with a couple monsters, I think, on their way. Tells you a lot about what this staff is doing, but somehow if you can win the last 2, and I don't think it's reasonable, and certainly the test got much tougher with Phil Yurkovich returning, threw up the bat signal, who's supposed to be out for the year. That becomes a much more daunting task. But I know you lean BC. The line has come crashing down. There's a lot of love for the Seminoles here.
It has, and it's a game that I can't tangle with. Our win total hangs in the balance here. We'll get 2 cracks for BC. Honestly,
we didn't give that out. That, by the way. So
I know. We had talked about it because the number had gotten away, but we'll see if we can get to 7-5 for our own. And I would take a push, like you said. When Dennis Grosel came in, I wrote this thing off for dead. We'll see what Yurkovich has, and of course, I know you'll be conflicted. This may be one of the only times you actually root against your money when it comes to college football, as it pertains to your goals.
Last week. Now, I know it was against Georgia Tech secondary, who's one of the worst in the entire country, but in terms of just watching the zip on the ball, it was certainly better than his first game back against Vatech.
And I think they could open the playbook a touch this weekend, but we'll see what happens. But enough Florida State talk. I'm not going to bore all the listeners here with talk of your beloved Seminoles. Best of luck to all of
Oregon
you.
Might only be favored by 1.5 on a neutral against those guys. I'm kidding.
I was waiting for one final parting shot, and you didn't fail to disappoint. Want to wish all of you, our loyal listeners, the best of luck with all your college football investments this weekend, and hopefully with a midshipman ticket in hand on Saturday afternoon, we'll see you at the window.